Do you guys have questions?
Hi, I'm Mel from Mogabyte Labs. My question is, can you raise funds with just a pitch deck, or what do you need to actually be able to raise funds?
So I would say the question is the kind of company you're starting. So if you're starting something that is like deep tech, highly technical, you have a PhD or have worked a lot in a relevant subject, right? You have a strong background for an expensive idea, then absolutely you can raise with just a pitch deck. If you're building like, the next Instagram and you're an engineer, but you haven't, even started to code like a very simple web interface, that starts to get harder because I'm a little bit confused about why you wouldn't at least like show me wireframes or something. If you're building an e-commerce company or if you're building like a consumer product goods brand, I would expect that you would have some sense of the design, the aesthetic, even if it's just like a mood board that you're pulling from other brands, using Canva to like mock up what a logo might look like. When you come to me with literally nothing, I get worried that you don't fully understand what you're getting into. But at the same time, unless you have millions of dollars, I don't expect you to say, here's my direct-to-consumer XYZ brand, right? My direct-to-consumer juice brand, and I already am in 10 stores, because how would you get the money to do that without money? And so it really comes down to like, what makes sense for the kind of company you're building, and how do you show me that you're the right founder and that like you get what you're building, and that can largely be in a pitch deck. And then if you haven't, if you haven't quit your job yet, all those things, like just like explain that, right? Hey, I'm raising money, I want to quit my job, I have, I'm the sole breadwinner for my family, I can't quit my job, whatever, but as soon as I'm able to raise money, that's what I plan to do. That kind of stuff goes a long way. It's really a communication thing, but absolutely, I assume that most pre-seed founders won't have much more than an idea that they've obsessed over endlessly and started to iterate, and a really nice pitch deck.
Hi, my name is Gabriel Simon. I work for Agile Network Technologies, and after listening your speech, by the way, congrats, I would like to ask, would you follow up on LinkedIn or on social media if you would get a great approach after a certain event or event like this? And do you think that the other speakers that are participating would also follow up on great approaches on LinkedIn? Because nowadays we used to generate these approaches, and we do not write our own ones sometimes. So.
Yeah, so I think that LinkedIn, it's hard in those kinds of platforms at any given time, and I manage my LinkedIn inbox pretty aggressively, and I'll still have hundreds of unanswered invites and all of that. Certainly if you are, it's fine to send somebody an invite. I think it's always good to just put like a sentence in there about why you want to connect, and like be really direct, right? So people who are like, hey, I enjoyed your talk, like, okay, but like a network is strong when everybody in the network is somebody that you know or have some idea of like who they are in real life, right? So if you say, hey, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn or anybody, great, you can do that and then see the content. If you want to pitch me and you're using like the LinkedIn like message thing, it's more effective just for me personally to go directly to my website and submit a deck, but that's fine, but just tell me that, right? Hey, really liked your talk. Maybe you hated it, that'd be aggressive. Really liked your talk at Techsylvania. I'm raising a pre-seed for my XYZ company. Here's a link to the deck, would love to chat, right? I'm probably just gonna reply to you and say, hey, submit it via the website, but like, you can do that if you want. It is low friction in terms of reaching people, which means that people are inundated, which means that it's hard to get back to people. So it's a high signal to noise ratio. That being said, there are far more founders trying to get money from investors than there are investors that you're trying to pitch. So like, it's fine to do, even though you shouldn't expect much from it. Or like, my absolute favorite sociopathic behavior from people is they'll be like, I invited you to connect on LinkedIn 6 months ago and you never accepted it. And I'm like, okay, like, okay, this is not a personal offense, but you're a weirdo, right? So don't take it personally, because most invites you literally never see when you're inundated with them.
Hi, I'm Alex from Aperio. Could you give us an example of a pitch deck that stood out for all the good reasons and why, out of all the pitch decks that you've seen throughout your career?
So I think that there are two kinds of pitch decks, or maybe four. I tend to think in quadrants. There are good decks with a good company. There are good decks with a bad company, bad deck, good company, bad deck, bad company. Depending on what you're building, like if you graduated from the top of Cluj University with some like deeply fancy science degree and you have like 25 PhDs and blah, 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 I do not care if you send me a pitch deck that's like scribbled on the back of messy receipts, because there is nothing in your training, there is nothing in your skill set, there is literally no reason that you should be able to design an amazing, beautiful, like brand world for what you're building. Like think about Google, their branding sucks. And I'm sorry if Google's in the room, and I know they're a sponsor and we love you, thank you, keep giving them money. But like their branding isn't that great, because it doesn't have to be, because they've built some of the most powerful algorithms that have completely changed the way that we interact with the world, right? Whereas like, I don't know, like Louis Vuitton has to have good branding because you are just massively overpaying for coated canvas with some logos on it. So if you don't deeply believe in that brand, what are you paying for, right? And so if you're building something that needs a good brand, it should look good. If you're building something where storytelling is at the forefront, your deck should tell a really good story. I firmly believe that probably some of the best deep tech companies in the world, their entire pitch deck at pre-seed could probably just be like one like formula, and they would be able to raise, I don't know, 100 million, $1 billion from it in this current environment, because if what you're doing is that transformative, that interesting, that good, you don't need like a shiny pitch deck with like good, cute, like, you know, whatever animated GIFs of who your advisors are. And if you want to know what a good pitch deck looks like, that's really simple. I personally love Guy Kawasaki's 10-slide pitch deck format. It's on the pitch, it's on my cleocap.com. Like when you go to pitch CleoCap, it says that as well. I don't need 20 pages of backstory about your life and the history of the internet and everything else. I want to know like who you are, and basically by that I mean, are you the right person? What's the problem? What's the solution? Are you the right, why are you the right person or team to solve the problem? And then like how, like who else is doing it? And then how much money do you want to raise? And that's like, and that was only 5. I don't know what the other ones are. It includes like, you know, the cover slide. That's all I care about. So anything over that at pre-seed, I personally kind of think is overkill. I hate the trend in Silicon Valley of doing like Notion memos or Loom videos. Like my time of watching videos on the internet is exclusively reserved for watching movies about castles that I cannot yet afford in Europe that I want to buy, and like watching things about like Real Housewives. I'm not going to watch your 20-minute explanation of your startup. If I can't flip through in 5 slides and decide whether or not this is compelling with what I'm interested in, and I think you're the right team, like you've lost me. VCs, especially American ones, have like, we can barely make it through a TikTok video. We have the shortest attention spans in the world.
Hi, I'm Alex, another Alex from Bitdefender. My question is about ideas. Say somebody comes to you with an idea that's not really already part of a formula. It's not a SaaS, it's not an e-commerce startup, and you have to know, okay, does this idea actually have potential? Do you have any red flags you look at that tell you, okay, this idea, I really don't care about it, they are wasting their time with it?
I mean, there are a bunch of things I just don't invest in, and that's true of any investor. Like, I don't really do biotech because I'm not a scientist, I can't underwrite it, I don't know how regulatory bodies work around the world, and like, every cancer cure startup I get pitched I think is amazing, and then I send it to like oncologist friends, and they're like, this isn't real, but good luck, right? So like, I just don't do that. And if you're a biotech investor, you probably never invest in cybersecurity, which I do a lot of, or fintech or whatever, right? So the first thing is like, broad strokes, do you do these kinds of deals? And then for me, and then the next question would be, does the founder, what's the problem? What's the solution? Why is it going to make me $1 billion? And like, does the founder seem to have two things ideally? One, a vague idea or like a vague idea of the path they're going to take to get there. And two, loads of coachability to get there. So the worst thing that happens is it's kind of like going on a bad first date where you're so far in and you're like, this is going kind of well. And then something weird and small happens and you're like, shit, this is never going to work. In my opinion, and I think a lot of my peers, where that happens in venture is really smart people with really strong pitches who then you ask them like one little question of like, oh, but what if this doesn't work? Or like the canonical question is, what if Google does it, right? And you can say, here's why I don't think Google will do it, or here's why I think blah, blah, blah. Like a great answer is like historically they've done buy versus build and they think this and blah, blah, blah. The worst answer is, well, Google could never do this. I mean, I have a PhD from, like, no, sweetie, Google can do it. Google can do it. And Google can buy the teacher who taught your teacher who taught your teacher and every patent to do it if they feel like it because they are Google, right? Wrong answer. You are not smarter than everybody at OpenAI, Google, and whatever combined. You're just not, right? But you'd be shocked at how often people say that. And I'm like, that's bad delusional, right? Good delusional is like, here's why I think that I have a 3-year head start, right? Here's something they said in a recent thing. Here's the recent shareholder meeting minutes where they said that they don't want to pursue XYZ, right? Why isn't Mark Zuckerberg going to do XYZ? Oh, because that man's only obsessed with like a bad haircut and the metaverse, and I'm building something over here. Like that's a reasonably good answer. So the thing that I'm looking for isn't, you can only make money a few ways, but the thing that I'm looking for is, do you have the vision and are you selling me on the vision? And also just, is it something that I broadly like? People will sometimes pitch me ideas where I'm like, everything about this will work. And as I like to joke, like, I could also just become an arms dealer, right? Like people will pitch me like next gen, I'm American and I have asthma, so I can't with fucking cigarette smoke. People will pitch me like, you know, better like cigar, like, you know, a delivery mechanism for cigars. And I'm like, no, you're gonna get cancer and everybody's jaws are gonna get cut off. And have you not seen the pictures on the cigar or on the, you know, cigarette packaging? So even if it's a great thing, like I looked at Juul early on and like all these like American vape companies, they're bad. They're going to get a bunch of kids addicted to cigarettes. I think cigarettes are bad, and I can't breathe around them. So, like, no, even though I have several friends who've made loads of money from them. And one, that is an anti-smoking rant. It's very important to me to tell Europeans not to smoke. But two, it's also, like, for me personally, that isn't my thing. Whereas, like, I'm not opposed to, like, alcohol startups, but alcohol makes it harder to raise money from certain kinds of investors, like my investors, whatever. So there's loads of those things that you're gonna run into. When you're raising money for a startup, assume you're gonna have to raise 100 to, or have like 100 to 300 pitches that you send out. Don't look at me like that, it's hard, right? It's like first dates. How many people are married to the first person you ever went on a first date with? If you are, you probably under-optimized, right? So the reality is that like it's a top of funnel game and you say, okay, I told Sarah my startup idea, she didn't love it. I told that investor, good. Once you get rejected by 10 investors, that means you're anywhere from like 3 to 10% through your funnel that you're gonna have to do. And so your question becomes, how do I pitch more people faster, more efficiently, not like, oh no, I thought that I was gonna talk to 20 people and be done. I don't know 20 people like to a person who will give me $1 million and like my entire job is just hanging out with rich people. So you certainly probably don't know 20 people who want to give you $1 million. So that means you're going to have to go meet and talk to or pitch like 150 plus.
Hey, I'm Laura. I have a bit of personal question. I don't have any business, so I don't have any interest in this subject, but I love your authenticity. And I wanted to ask you, how did you get to not be afraid anymore and to be so self-aware? Because I think that it's a very important key in the business world, to be authentic. And I love your energy very much.
Honestly, I was born
I
like
have
this.
emotions, so sorry.
I was born like this. I was literally, like, I could show you videos of me at 2 years old that are basically exactly this. I don't know. I was born out of the womb, just a delusional little confidence machine. And that doesn't mean that, like, I never doubt myself or I never whatever, but kind of like I was talking about, leaning into your strengths. Like, I am a delusional yapper morning, noon, and night. You can ask my husband, like, he's like trying to go to sleep at 2 a.m. And I'm like, you know what? And I'm like giving him a one-person TED talk. And that man is like, this is great. Could we please talk about it? Not right now, right? So you just have to lean, he's very lucky. You just have to lean into it, right? So that is me. If I were in a job, I literally took a computer science class one semester because I had to. And as soon as you completed like 3 tasks, you could stop going to class and get like a passing grade instead of getting an A. That's what I did because I was like, this is so boring. I have nobody to talk to. I'm just staring at a screen, moving buttons around. I wasn't like terrible at it, but like I need to be able to yap. That is what I want to do with my life. And so for me, I think if you deeply struggle with like, yes, if you have anxiety, get it treated, whatever. But if you deeply struggle with like doing one thing, that's probably not your thing. If the thought of sitting up here just taking random questions in like the world's hottest room from a bunch of strangers feels crazy to you, then that's probably not the right path for you, right? So figure out the thing that is the right path for you and lean into that, because that's then where you get authenticity, and that's, I think, where everything gets a lot easier in life because you're in your lane. And whatever your lane is, like you need somebody who's really good at it. And it's a lot easier to be really good at whatever you're naturally like inclined to do than it is to try to do something that isn't quite you, because it won't feel right, and it's just very unlikely that you're going to be that good at it.
Hi.
Maybe can I, like a small addition? Practice does work. I used to be like with sweat running around behind my back also, on conferences. But once you've done the first 10, things start to become easier. And if you own the subject also, so don't be afraid to just do it. You don't need to be born like this. It really helps, clearly, but you can practice. There's no worry. Don't worry.
Yeah, hi. My name is Vlad. Nice to meet you. My question is, you said earlier that we need to pitch a lot. We need to pitch like to 100 people and maybe make that idea public. But there's a fear that I've met some founders, most of them developers that had a good idea, and they're trying to work with me to make that into a product. But their main fear when they talk about their idea, if it's interesting and if it's interesting or not, their fear is, could this be cloned? And pitching it to a lot of people, making it really public and going all out with a good idea or maybe an original idea, it's pretty hard for a new founder to do that because he doesn't want his idea to be stolen. My question is, do founders need to be afraid of their apps to be cloned or their products?
So I think that like every idea ends up being essentially like you're not going to be the only one, right? Like that being said, I think there's 2 pieces of it. Professional venture capital investors already have a job that's 1,000 times easier than starting a company. So they're not going to steal your idea. And in the US at least, they're not going to sign an NDA. You either pitch them or you don't. The place to be concerned, and I do see this in smaller markets, and this is not at all a Romania thing, this is like, I see this a lot in smaller markets in the US, is there'll be somebody in the local ecosystem who's like, I was an early employee at whatever, Revolut, and then I, took some money off the table, now I spend my time in CEE, and I'm helping founders, give me 5% of your company as an advisor, and they haven't done anything for you, right? But they want a bunch of your company, and then maybe I'll invest, give me, I want to be in it, really like understand everything. Those people, unless it's somebody you personally have known well for a long time, I would be cautious. One, they're often time wasters. They want to take your equity, they want to use you'll see them floating around the like LinkedIn influencer sphere as like, I'm a top advisor. And it's like, no, you're stealing from Startup Stop, right? So be careful of who you're giving your ideas to. Y Combinator is not going to steal your ideas. Sequoia is not going to steal your ideas. Or even Cleo Capital, we're a small venture fund. I'm not going to steal your ideas, right? So those types, like angel investors, and you can ask around about people's reputations, but like you have to send me a pitch deck. If there is something and you have to be able to explain what you're doing, top level, broad strokes, enough that I want to take a call or meeting. Your pitch deck should be really brief. If your idea is so special and so unique that no one else has ever thought about it, and they'll only think about it because it's in the pitch deck, and therefore someone's going to steal it, but you can explain it in a 5-slide deck, that doesn't make any sense, right? So the reality is that like, hey, I have a PhD in electrical engineering from Cluj, and I was at X company for 5 years. Now I'm building something really early stage in the XYZ space with a little bit of color, right? Or like, hey, here are my publications, or here's my thesis paper, now I'm expanding on that topic. Like that, and I know that not everybody is like, explicitly only coming from that highly technical background, but in this ecosystem a lot are. You don't have to tell me that much for me to decide if it's interesting or not, right? So saying my idea is so great I'm never going to tell anybody anything about it so that they can't steal it is a great way to never raise money. And by the way, sending me a 50-slide pitch deck on day 0 with like diagrams to all of your patents is also overkill, and a decent way to get your idea stolen. And then that's the other thing. I don't know how IP works here, but in the US at least, it's relatively simple to file provisional patents if you really have something that's that unique. It's relatively simple to do some of that intellectual. Yeah, and I don't know, and I also don't know, and this is something like a good ecosystem question, is like, if you're part of the EU, is there a way to go do that? You know, one, can you file in the US, does that give you some protection? Or is there like a cheaper country in the EU that you can go file in? And it's like, oh, everybody files in, you know, whatever, Italy, because it's easier, and then that, like, you get the EU level. I don't know, but like, if you have an IP specific concern, I would say go spend time with people in the ecosystem who do this, and learn about what other companies in your position do for it.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Leo. I am the founder and CEO of Chat City, which is a map-based social platform. Obviously, since we're both Americans, we both lived in the United States, and I'm sure you travel a lot to many different places, but there's been a very big problem in the dating industry in particular, especially with swipe-based dating, which is called a whole host of issues. I've been studying the industry since 2011, so I'm very well versed in dating dynamics and social dynamics and how they're interlinked. So my biggest question to you is, if you were going to bet on whether or not you would, like if you were at a fork road and you were going to decide if you wanted to invest in a company that would facilitate real-world connections versus in the direction where AI is going, since it's almost not replacing human connections, but in a way it's kind of going there. If you were at that fork road, which one would you choose and why?
I don't believe, so I used to run the dating app for Bumble, or investments for dating app Bumble. I don't think, and I know a lot of dating apps are betting the opposite direction right now, I don't think that your AI avatar talking to somebody else's AI avatar is going to result in like long-term, stable, happy partnerships of two humans. Your AI avatars might be very, very happy forever, and I wish them the best. So I have questions about that. I also think that there is you don't need to have a partner, you don't need to be dating, you don't need to seek out human connection. If you don't seek out human connection, just make sure that you don't go like full like insane American mass shooter and like whatever, like just like hang out in nature, right? But like if you want human connection, there's a lid for every pot. Like I don't know why if you want human connection, you want to long-term talk to an AI avatar instead. And if you don't really want human connection, I don't know why you need to talk to an AI avatar instead. I think what the dating apps are actually trying to solve for is kind of two things. One, a lot of the really big dating apps in the US are publicly traded companies, which means they have to solve for their stock price, and AI over the last few years has been a great, saying that word, Papa John's, the pizza delivery chain, right? It's a pizza chain. They sell pizzas to eat. Once said AI 59 times in their like 2-hour quarterly earnings call, and then their stock went way up. It's a pizza company. They don't have AI, but they say that and the stock goes up. So to some extent, the dating companies do that for the same reason every other company does that. The other piece of it is what they're trying to solve is is the exhaustion, right? Because the same way that I'm like, it's gonna take you like hundreds of meetings to find an investor, it's going to take you that to find somebody to date as well. But for a variety of reasons, people tend to feel ashamed about that or exhausted or like just annoyed and like in between. It's not like you take 100 first dates and they're all one and done. You date somebody for a few months. You find out that they're whatever, cheating on you, or they're like an asshole, or they're the exhaustion. People are trying to solve, I don't even think for the meeting up. We still mostly live in a world where you can go out of your house and see other humans, right? There was a brief time during COVID where that wasn't true, but for the most part, that's true. It's not meeting up. It's the like, I don't want to say, oh, that person over there is kind of cute. Maybe at the lunch thing, I stood kind of close to them and they didn't like look at me and, you know, I thought their aura ring was a wedding ring and so blah, 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 blah. Like all of that sort of anxiety is what people are trying to solve for by saying your AI avatar says that my AI avatar should love you and therefore I can meet up with you and feel less disappointed. And I don't actually think that's gonna work. I think what you'll find over time is you'll get more and more, they'll get more and more data, they're not gonna share it with the world, that shows that actually the online to offline doesn't work as well as people thought. And so and I also just think it's a race to the bottom in terms of money and everything else. But like dating apps are hard. There's a reason that there's not a lot of them at scale and that the ones that are at scale aren't that big as publicly traded companies. And on top of all of that, I would just say that if you firmly, deeply believe that AI avatars are the way to go, you should build a company you want to build. I don't think we're actually going to see a lot of success there.
I wanted to know if, because you said you were getting thousands of pitch decks every year. So if you get one that is good, but it's just not right for the type of company you would invest in, do you take the time to give people feedback and direct them to the right VC?
No, that would be an infinite amount of time. But two, the other reason I don't do it is what I don't like about a company might have nothing to do with their long-term success or not. And it might be, and you also have to define success, right? When you're trying to fundraise, success is getting the funds raised, not necessarily the long-term trajectory of your company. So like you might be building a dating app that's all about AI avatars and get somebody to fund that because they think that's the hot new thing. And then, and I pass on it because I don't think it's a good idea. And then 2 years on, you're realizing it's not a great idea, but you've gleaned some other insight or you have a huge database. So then you pivot and then you're building a different company and then that company raises more money and you go on to be whatever, right? I'm friends with the founder of Slack. Slack started as a gaming company. Right? I'm not a Slack investor either because I wasn't a VC yet, but Slack is maybe something that I would have thought to invest in. A casual gaming company, 100% not. And everybody who invested initially in his casual gaming company went on to make crazy amounts of money because it pivoted to Slack, even though some of them were probably like, I did not sign up for a workplace communication tool. So like giving feedback to founders is personal feedback about what I personally don't like about your company. To use the dating analogies again, like I could give you feedback. Someone could have told me on a date, people have told me on a date, oh, you talk a lot, right? You talk a lot. Okay, but that's who I am and that's what I want to do. And then the people I do attract and I do want to be with are probably people who like that more, right? And so taking personal feedback from somebody where there's no future with them, I think is actually not a good idea, even if they are willing to give it. If someone's giving you the feedback of like, hey, your pitch deck was formatted incorrectly and it didn't open on my computer, like that's good feedback, but you should also have that problem solved to begin with. So anything that's personal, it's not a great use of your time. And then in terms of passing it on to other people, I don't really invest in dating apps, but if you send me a pitch for your dating app, just have dating apps on the mind now. If you send me a pitch for your dating app, I hit ARC, I look at it, if it's a pitch, in my pitch thing, I respond to you. If it's just an email, just as a process, I don't. But it's in my archive, and then if somebody comes to me and says, hey, have you seen any dating apps recently? I literally just type in dating apps into my search bar, and I will forward them your deck with like no recommendation, because I don't know you, I don't know the company, just here's a company I've seen, right? And I will do that. If other VCs ask me, have you seen a company that does X, I'm fine like trying to like rifle through my little like Rolodex of brain and Google inbox to find a couple things and pass it along. That's not a scalable strategy for founders, but like, no, if we've never met you, we don't know anything about you, we don't like call up a cabal of other investors and blacklist you, and we're also not like hand-picking 20 investors to introduce you to.
Mel Moga again. I'm building a startup in the sustainability domain, and it's a 20 billion market. However, the epicenter due to EU regulations would be in Europe. Probably the startup would be global, but again, the larger amount of money and revenue would come from Europe probably in the beginning. Would that be something you would invest in if it's not necessarily scalable globally? And
it doesn't matter, right? It's just, is it going to be an individual multi-billion-dollar company, right? So you could build just for India or China or the US and be a multi-billion-dollar company. You can build across the entire globe and be a multi-billion-dollar company. If somebody has a US-only mandate, they probably wouldn't invest in something that's mostly Europe, right? And certainly vice versa. It's more rare for American VCs to have a US-only mandate. You might have to have a US entity, like a Delaware C Corp, but it's relatively rare in the US. And the thing that's very common in Europe that's almost unheard of in the US is the sort of, oh, you're in Munich, you got money from the Munich Development Bank or whatever, you can only invest in Munich startups. Like that's, for the most part, not a thing in the US. It's very, very rare. So the answer is, are you personally building a company that can have a multi-billion-dollar exit or market cap? And if it's a $20 billion market, you're certainly not going to be 100% of the market. You probably won't be 10% of the market, right? So what I would say, or maybe there's some really specific thing you're doing where there is a road to being, I actually have no idea how Europe feels about monopolies. In general, in the US, monopolies are sort of illegal, but it's like wink, wink illegal, but just practically they tend not to work that well. So you don't generally think a company's going to take over more than X amount of market share. So like it's a math problem about how your company individually becomes a billion-dollar company. Europe is a fine place to do business. If you were like, oh, we're only servicing like North Korea, I'd be like, I think that's a small country, but I also think that like I'm gonna end up in some sort of banking jail if I give money to a company that's like investing in North Korea, right? And that's an American like sanctions-y thing. That's a specific thing. I haven't checked the news lately, but I don't think America has sanctions on Europe as a whole. So like that's how you want to think about the problem you're solving for investors, or am I investable, is can this be an individual multi-billion-dollar company? And I call it like top up and bottom down, bottoms up and top down, right? So top line is like you're making multi-billions in revenue, and then like what falls to the bottom line. Bottom up is like you have this many users, and like here's how they'll pay you money to be a multi-billion-dollar company. If that's the case with some sort of margin at some sort of scale, then there will be an investor for what you're building, because all you're really selling to VCs is the opportunity for them to make money. You have to find the right VCs who are excited about it, but you're just selling them the opportunity to make money. So you explain to me how, and like for the love of God, and this is differs by investor type, but most early stage investors, unless they're hyper specific, we only invest in EU sustainability, blah, blah, blah. If they're a generalist investor, they do not want to hear the specifics of that solar farm behind us and where that the margin comes from and how that's going to be helpful for your like 0.01% of your overall revenue. They want broad strokes, like think like a toddler talking, like me want money. That's it.
I think that's the summary of your entire presentation. It's like, show me you can earn me a yacht.
Yes.
I think that's the single sentence that drives your pitch deck,
Yes.
drives will I invest in you, etc.
And it is, right? Because that's literally my job. And we forget that VCs have jobs. That is actually my job. I do not have a responsibility to be nice to you, to give you money, to help you, any of my founders. That is, it might be stuff that I raise money, a story that I tell. My actual job is to return money to my investors in the private markets, not the public markets, like meaning like I can't go put it in the stock market or just buy Bitcoin, usually. So like I need to just put it in startups who can make me money. And if you can show me that, then like if you can show investors exactly how you're going to buy them a yacht, then you will widely open up the world of investors who are interested in giving you money. And then from there you can pick the right one for you.
Yes, hello, I'm Alexandra. I don't own a business and I don't invest yet, but I have a curiosity. So you saw thousands of pitches and your investor invested in tons of companies. But I'm curious if you, when you make the decisions, if you take into consideration only hard data and analysis or also instinct based on experience?
So there is very little hard data for early stage founders. There's just not, right? And even if they have hard data about like, it's who are the people, what's the problem that they want to solve, but by the time you have years of data, assume that it takes you at least a year to get your company from idea to like up and running to start to have data. And then so for years of data, the first year could be a fluke, right? The second year probably, so really you're talking about year 3. So now you're 4 years in from starting a company. In the US, 4 years in, you're probably like a series A or B. And that's not the space that I mostly invest in. So for me and for American investors, pre-seed investors, even seed, there isn't any hard data. One thing that some of my European peers do that literally just sends me into an absolute like losing my mind meltdown is like wanting like revenue data from a company that doesn't barely exist yet. And you're like, anything they tell you is a pretend lie. And like, if you're basing your decisions on that, pretending like it's hard data, in my mind, that's a lot worse than me looking at your experience and your pitch deck and talking to you about how you anticipate growing the business and then making a decision on that, even though you might call that soft data.
Well, I thought we were almost there.
One more question. Around the equity that the founders give away, what would be acceptable margins for pre-seed? You mentioned 10 or more out of your company.
So this is gonna sound like dumb advice, but I'm totally serious. The Social Network, the movie about the founding of Facebook, is a great movie for founders to watch at early stages because they do a pretty good job of delving into a lot of the mechanics, or the TV show Silicon Valley too. In general, if you can get away with only selling 10% of your company per round of equity, that is very good. That means if you're raising 500,000, you're raising it at roughly a 5 million valuation and so on and so forth. If you're selling more than 25% equity, and it's not like biotech or something where that's more normal, it's probably not a great deal. I forget exactly what so like Y Combinator, I think, buys like 6% of your company for like, I don't know, like 150,000, 200,000 or something right now. That is like, but they're also bringing their network and it's a good blah, blah, blah. If some random angel investor wants to give you, the same deal to give you $10,000, that's probably a bad deal, right? They don't have the network, they don't know anybody, they just like have a few dollars. So you have to be mindful of that. It's also a good problem to have. Usually when people take shitty deals, it's because they're in a hard spot financially, and that usually happens a little bit later on in the company's life. So the more you can do to conserve burn, spend less money, usually the better. I will say that I genuinely cannot overstate how much of an advantage people from this part of the world have when it comes to starting a company, because you're starting generally from zero. What I mean by that is the average 22-year-old in America who's just graduated university is $80,000 on average in debt. And that also means their family has probably put in another 100,000 or so on top of that, right? And even if you think, well, Americans are kind of rich, like you can easily pay 75,000, 90,000 a year to go to university for 4 years, right? So if your parents have 2 kids, like they're spending like $1 million for them to go to university, how rich do they have to be for that to be fine and for them to keep funding your lifestyle while you start a company? Like, you're even in the US, that's crazy, right? Our houses are more expensive, our health insurance is like everything's so expensive. So I've had times in my life where I've had to have a job because I can't be at zero, right? I can't live in my parents' basement working on an idea when I have to pay $800 a month for student loans and then another $500 for health insurance, because that's $1,300 a month before I've spent $1 to like feed, clothe, like have a roof over my head. Whereas here, the idea that you can graduate from university and it's like free and you're at zero, right? So when you ask your parents, how much have you spent over the course of your lifetime on my education? They're like, buying you pencils? And in America, they're like $1 million, sweetie, you're worth every penny. And you're like a fucking like preschool teacher, right? Who's making $20,000 a year. So like you have a huge advantage in that you don't have to take terrible deals necessarily early on because your basis cost is very low. And so the goal is to keep that in mind. If you have a hard time raising, some people have a really easy time raising, great, you don't need advice, go raise. Most people everywhere in the world have a hard time raising. In the US, there's a ton of money, but there's a ton of competition for the money. And you'd think, like literally, I like to joke that if I had $1 every time somebody came up to me to tell me they were a Stanford or Ivy League alum, starting a company, who got an MBA, but I would literally be able to buy a yacht with that. Like my inbox every year is inundated with those people who are asking me, hey, can I work for you for free, right? So you could think that like, oh, my life would be so much easier if I'd gone to Stanford and interned at OpenAI, but you and literally 1,000 other people are now paying insane American cost of living, competing for the same like seed rounds or whatever, like with the exact same pedigree. So it's actually not less competitive. It's just different. You have different problems, but when it comes to fundraising specifically, you can go to zero and stay at zero. Like, be nice to your parents because you might need to live in their basement. That would be literally my best pre-seed advice, because you can stay at zero comfortably much longer and be more mindful about who you're able to raise money from than your average American, who literally you can die in America and you still owe the student loan debt.
I think we finally exhausted the audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
My turn?
Yes.
Maybe one question. I always keep a question as a backup in case everybody's silent, but that's not a risk with you. How about sort of single founders versus having co-founders versus having maybe 4 co-founders? How is that influencing your decision?
So I like to say that, and I think this will resonate well here, I like to say that VCs like you to have co-founders for the same reason that farmers have multiple children, which is they need somebody to do the work if one of you dies. And that's like a joke, but not. But the reality is that I want to back the right team. If you're a solo founder, that's fine. I just need to understand what your plan is to hire more people. And if you say, I'm never going to hire anybody, I'm going to, run sales and tech and everything, finance and blah, 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 and I'm never going to hire anybody else, that's probably delusional in a bad way. That's not a fit. If you have 4 co-founders, but 3 of them you just met 3 weeks ago in a university class, and you own 50% of the company, and they're splitting, 20%, and then the rest is in an options pool for future employees, that's also not good. So if, whatever you need, at the early stages, it's storytelling. So you need a good story. So if you have a story for why your founding team is the right team, then that's good. If you don't have a story for that, that is bad. If your story is, the two of us started a company, but then we were on a ski trip with you and you heard us talking about it and we're like, well, guys, I want to be a co-founder, and we're so conflict averse we couldn't tell you no. Now I have like 50 red flags in my head, versus if you're like, we had the idea, like the three of us had the idea together on a ski trip, and like, you know, you're doing the tech and you're doing the finance and you're doing the marketing or you're doing the product, whatever, and here's why this is gonna work. So it comes back to like what makes sense and what makes sense and what is true, and then your storytelling around why that's the optimal route for your company. But I personally don't care. I think you go to war with the army you have, and if it's just you who has a good idea or just you who's ready to like, you know, live in your parents' basement for a while and get it off the ground, and then you'll hire your buddies later, you know, that you used to work with at Revolut or whatever, like as early employees because they can't or won't take on the day zero risk, just tell me that, and that's fine.
Another question is like, probably one of your biggest competitors is Bootstrap. How are you with that? Should people try to bootstrap as far as they can, or is there an optimal point, or should they not do it at all?
Well, I mean, I think it's up to you, right? It's the kind of company you want to build. You can't scale that far on bootstrapping. You can't scale that far and fast on bootstrapping. And it also depends on what kind of company you're building. So if you're building like solar has a lot of financing in it, right? So if you're building some sort of solar company and you're like, hey, I'm an engineer and I know something about solar, and so I'm going to, my co-founder used to be in solar sales, so I'm gonna build a website and they're gonna go get some of the first customers, and then we have a solar financing provider, like that's technically bootstrapping, but that makes sense for you, right? And I have no dog in that fight. I'm not forcing money on you. If you don't have a plan, or honestly, like a lot of my friends who bootstrap, or a lot of people I know who bootstrap, they're just rich. Like it's not bootstrapping when it's like taking money from your trust fund and using it to fund your company, and that's fine too. It's nobody gets to pick where they're born. But often what I see is people who have an interesting company, but it's not really advancing because they won't take money because they don't want dilution or they don't want to give up any control. And that's fine. It's just like if you need money and you don't have money, the money's not going to magically appear and then you're going to be hamstrung. So, and the other piece of it, the other thing I will say that I absolutely hate is when I am sitting in a room of white dudes from Stanford, nobody talks about bootstrapping. Does not mean, and then when I'm sitting in a room of all women or all people of color or all people who aren't in Silicon Valley, everybody talks about it. I personally don't think that you should bootstrap versus raise VC based on your like ethnicity or race or country of origin. I think you should do it because of the needs of your business. And I think that that advice needs to be given out evenly. If you give me 100 people, some of them based on what they want to build should bootstrap, some of them shouldn't. And bootstrapping because you feel like no one will give you money because you're sitting in northern Romania is a dumb reason to bootstrap.
If you were going to list either with the top 1 or 2 common denominators between startups that succeed, what would they be?
Honestly, the startups that don't give up, and that sounds really stupid, but like Slack's a great example. Like Twitter's another example. Like how the fuck is Twitter still around? It started as I don't even remember what it started, like a live blogging service or like, no, it was something, maybe it was also a gaming company, right? And it's gone through every iteration known to man. And there's genuinely a world where it's possible that like Elon and the ketamine like are all too much and then it gets resold and like, or goes public again or whatever, right? And becomes another thing. So like, I just, like there was somebody running around in a shirt out there that I really liked that was like, you know, born to innovate, forced to pivot. Like that's the reality. You have to like be a cockroach. And if you don't, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't stop. There are plenty of founders where it's like, just stop. Like the company hasn't worked, the cap table's fucked. Like, you know, it's time to move on and do something else. And there's something to be said for knowing when to do that. But the biggest indicator of success, most founders who tell you everything's always up and to the right are sociopathic liars, which does well in our industry. But Honest founders will tell you about all of the times they were like, everything has gone to shit, we are completely fucked, like we are out of money, we are out of ideas, this is never gonna work, and then somehow. I'm friends with a bunch of people who are investors in a fintech in the US, Chime, that just went public, and you can go look at, their origin story. They literally were about to shut down. They basically couldn't make the next payroll, and in the US, that's like functionally illegal, so you have to shut down if you can't make payroll. And then one of my friends, wrote them a Series A. It was her first big check she'd ever written as a VC. This is like a decade ago. It was her first check she'd ever really written as a VC. Her team was like, I don't know, it seems like, and she's like, no, I have conviction. And then now they're like a multi-billion-dollar public company, right? So you can look at that and say, oh, it's so easy to go public as a fintech in America, blah, blah, blah. No, they were like about to lose it all, right? And they had like one last, and they didn't have competing term sheets. They had one. They were like so lucky. Everything was against them. They were done. They were down. They were out. And then they weren't. And so if you want to know if your company will survive, it's just a question of you looking in the mirror and saying, will I survive? Because if you survive, then the company continues to survive. Cool. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.